probably.
And the
yeah.
thin set. Yep.
So, for those of you following along in your code books at home, the table N1102.1.1.
If you haven't yawned up to this point, this is where you start.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
Hello.
And Rob Watzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Hey.
Please email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, good morning, gents. It's now fall in New England. I think it was 61 degrees when I woke up inside my house this morning. You'd think I was outside, but no, I was actually indoors, and it made it really tough to get out of bed, I got to say.
Have you turned your heat on yet?
So I have it set at 60 in case, something weird happens, and it was down to 61. But I did turn it up when I got out of bed to 68, which was very balmy in comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no heat at our house yet. Michelle's fighting hard to keep it cool. She loves this weather.
So are you guys part of the New England contingent who believes you just don't put the heat on no matter what until a certain day? Is that your MO?
I don't know if we've actually planned it that way, but it seems to sort of, happen that way every year.
What is the magic day?
I think she said this time we're waiting till Halloween.
Yikes.
It's supposed to freaking snow. Anyway, what about you, Matt?
We turned it on.
Yeah?
Turned it on the
Was
other day.
it comfy this morning?
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah, it comes on about 5:30.
Oh, so you have a setback thermostat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to mention, remember, it was the last time or the time before I mentioned I had that home energy assessment, and the guys did a bunch of air sealing and dropped the air leakage in my house supposedly quite a bit. And so last night I took my little infrared digital thermometer and ran around the house and
You're such a nerd.
checked to see how the house was, and it seemed to be at about a constant 60 degrees. And it was about 20 degrees colder outside last night, all night long, and the temperature didn't seem to drop by the time I got up this morning.
Well, that would be testimony to the good work that your weatherization crew did, right?
I'd say so. And also, I think, my old plaster walls in this house seem to hold a lot of heat.
Could you discern a temperature difference between your framing members behind the plaster and the cavities in between?
I didn't have an infrared camera. I just had the infrared thermometer, and I don't think it's quite that accurate. I wasn't going for that level of detail.
For the listeners out there, this time of year is a fantastic time to look for thermal bypasses. That is air leaks in your house. They'll show up on roof sheathing. Most areas will be frost covered, but you'll see spots where warm interior air is hitting that roof sheathing on the underside and melting the frost on the other side, and it's like having a very low-tech thermal camera, so that's pretty useful. I pay attention to houses on the way to work because I'm that nerdy.
It gets even more exciting when you get a little bit of snow too, right? Because then you can really see the patterns in the roofs.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can see the rafters right through. They're like day and night.
Yeah. I was using a little thermal camera over the weekend.
You're a nerd too.
I was trying to find the joist because I was working on my...
So wait a minute. Why do you have a thermal camera?
Well, we were given one to test, and now I'm comparing an older version to a newer, sort of lower res version.
So what are they?
They're both FLIR.
Uh-huh.
They attach to a smartphone.
Does it work okay?
They work great.
Yeah.
I would say the higher res version is a little more useful when you're actually trying to locate joists to attach to. But yeah.
So
where do those things run?
Yeah, I was going to say
$200 or
thermal
$300
cameras used to cost tens of thousands of dollars. So
yeah, what is the new one? I think it's like $400 or $300. I think it's $300.
Incredible, right?
Yeah. But yeah, it's a fantastic piece of equipment. But I mean, you can see the joist. You can see, like the.
Do you see like little animals looking back at you? Like on the other side
if
of
they
the
were
wall?
there, I might. I mean, it was surprising because I had to take out a bunch of insulation in the ceiling in the attic, and
that must have been fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Okay.
I won't go into details about how gross some of it was. But yeah, and then I had to put some blocking in to basically attach a wall to from below.
Okay.
And as soon as I put that blocking in, I went downstairs and brought out the thermal camera, and I could see where it was. And it was like maybe less than 5 minutes later, I could see all that stuff. I was like, that's pretty impressive. I can't imagine the temperature of the drywall changed that much that fast, but it did. And
Amazing.
I mean, because it's less than a degree difference that this thing is measuring.
That's a pretty good sensitivity for something that costs $400.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic. So, I mean, if you're doing your air sealing work or whatever, I mean, it's fantastic for that. I mean, it sees like all the cold joints, and this house is, 1950s R13 if I'm lucky in the walls.
Right.
Like the crazy thing when I first used it was you could see like all these places where they hadn't put any insulation in the wall at all, and it picks it up right away.
So I wouldn't want to know that. I gotta say, I would just rather not know that there are holes in my insulation.
Yeah. I had the same experience. I had borrowed one of those thermal cameras from a company I was working for a few years back, and my house has no sheathing, so it's sort of 1870s balloon frame. The way they made everything rigid was they put corner braces in a lot of places, so you can see those corner braces because when they blew in fiberglass insulation sometime back in the 80s,
they blew in fiberglass?
Yeah, they blew in fiberglass.
Interesting.
For all the messed up stuff the former homeowners did to my house, they were really trying to do the right thing. I mean, they put new replacement windows in when that was a very new thing. They put one of those greenhouse kits on the south side of the house. It's got the slanted windows on it. I think I have 4 4-foot by 6-foot windows. And I'm actually able, on days like today, if it's sunny, it will actually turn the heat off in my house. It gets warm enough in that sunroom.
My guess is that they were just hemorrhaging money and were trying everything possible to stop, spending thousands on their heating bills.
Yeah, but, the thing that they didn't realize is that the house leaked like a sieve. So they're doing all this stuff to try to bring heat into the house. And if they'd only known about air sealing back then, they would have been a little bit better.
Yeah.
Better off.
Thank goodness for building science.
Yeah.
I've had some projects at home. I've been trying to hurt my back, as I do routinely. My wife and I are doing a stone patio, and it's unfair to say I'm building the patio. She's actually been doing most of the work. She stripped all the sod where we previously had grass and then leveled the area so we could put down natural cleft bluestone rocks. Like just hunks of bluestone. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty satisfying. I think we have a picture, right, Jeff?
We do.
What do you guys think?
Looks pretty good. Nice tight joints there. You've been working hard at that.
I love my 5-inch cordless grinder. That is a freaking amazing tool. And you don't need to cut all the way through the bluestone. You can just make a 1-inch deep score, and then it breaks very easily.
So are you cutting it from the back so that you get the nice rough edge on the top? You're not really paying attention
No,
to that?
I'm doing it from the top side just because I'm using this adjacent stones to trace onto the shape I want. So, and I don't think you can really tell. Once it's all packed with stone dust and stuff, it seems the cut pieces seem to look a lot like the rest of it.
Yeah. Looks pretty nice. What are you going to do with that fire pit? Are you going to level that out, or is that going to stay sort of in plane with the rest? Yeah.
No, it's not going to stay like that. It needs to be leveled. I think I'm going to buy some granite, stones to go around that too. I'm not a big, I have no experience in masonry, so this is kind of exciting for me. It's very dusty, I will tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when you're dry cutting stone, it's really a bad idea.
Yeah.
Not to.
Yeah. Keep your windows shut.
Keep your windows shut. Wear a dust mask.
Keep a hose. Keep a hose nearby. If you can have a little trickle on the hose.
So what I've been doing is having my son hold the leaf blower to kind of direct the stone dust away from the house and my lungs. And you just have to make sure that Carol's not in the background because that really upsets her.
Like kabuki theater.
What have you guys been doing?
That closet. I was adding the closet finally in that bedroom.
Nice.
That's what I was doing all that blocking and stuff for.
Are you guys trying to finish that before cold temperatures?
Yeah, I just want to get in that bedroom. We've been talking about it for months, on this podcast and elsewhere.
What's left to do?
Now I just have to plaster the walls. I wanted to do lime plaster.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, lime plaster over gypsum.
Because drywall's not challenging enough?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I wanted some other textures, some other look in there. And I like the way the lime plaster looks, so.
I know you're a big fan.
Have you worked with that before? Or?
Yeah, I have. And I worked with an author on a story about it. It's in the issue that's out now, I think. Yeah,
240?
No, I don't
That's
remember.
The plot.
Yeah,
Never
I don't
mind.
remember.
Just ignore that.
We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, but Ace McCarlton worked with on that, and it was fantastic.
I got to tell you,
The
I
house
was
looked
really
great.
very skeptical of the whole idea because of it's just not something I've ever seen. But I think it looks amazing when it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I think there's
agree.
a lot to like about it environmentally, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's got hygienic properties, so I mean that's why they used to use it in hospitals and in milking parlors.
How so? Because like bacteria doesn't grow on the.
Yeah, it's alkaline, so it sort of just resists mold growth and any kind of organic growth at all. So
Cool.
so it's sort of like a naturally clean material, and it goes on relatively easily. And after it cures, it basically turns back into limestone on your wall. So it's harder than gypsum. It's harder than the drywall. It's very resilient.
So why don't people do that more often?
Probably just
Because it's expensive.
No, really?
Is it really?
The materials are cheap, but you're talking about having a bunch of people in there plastering your walls.
Right.
So that's the expensive part is the labor.
So
it's a lot cheaper to do drywall.
So for DIY, it's not quite as expensive. It's more about the labor.
Yeah. Right.
How big of a batch do you make at once? Like how quickly do you have to get it up there and smoothed out?
As long as you keep it covered and don't let it dry out.
What do you mean? In the bucket?
In the bucket.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just cover it with plastic and leave it there pretty much indefinitely as long as it stays wet.
What?
This is you're using Mason's lime.
So it doesn't
it's
harden
hydrated
chemically?
lime. It won't. It needs air, or it needs really carbon dioxide to cure.
That's
so
why
it
if you-
binds with the carbon dioxide and turns back into limestone.
That's why you have to keep it airtight. If you just kept it in a bucket, it would turn.
Yeah, if you just left it open to the air, then it would cure and harden, and you'd have a bucket full of limestone.
I had a bucket full of grout one time like that.
Yeah.
What about you, Rob?
Oh, not too many real projects going on right now. I'm kind of trying to take a break. I mean, just a little.
Well, you just bought a truck for crying out loud.
Yeah, that's the project. Right? Yeah, I got a 1966 Ford F100. It was
With a 4-speed.
4-speed.
That makes it way cooler.
Yeah, it's got a 352 V8 and a 4-speed on the floor. And some kid bought it in high school, and now he's in college. He doesn't have any time to work on it anymore. And he had an uncle who was into hot rods, and so got him the nice period correct 4-speed transmission for it, and it runs nice. I took the exhaust manifold off the other day because it's got an exhaust leak, and I was flattening that out and getting some new gaskets. So this weekend, hopefully, I'll get it on the road for.
So you have a machine shop at home too?
No, not quite. I got my barn has a metal shop in it, but whenever I get into any serious projects, a buddy of mine restores antique cars, and so I head over to his shop and do some.
Boy, I need friends like that. That's really handy.
I need to
So is
know-
this going to be a work truck, or is this a hobby vehicle?
Well, so I had 60s cars and trucks when I was in high school and college 20 some odd years ago, and have always expected that I would have them indefinitely. And we bought a house without a garage 18 years ago and don't have the room to put one in. And so that's why I haven't had any classic cars, because I don't want to them sitting and rotting in the driveway. But I kind of figured an old truck, doesn't matter if it's a little rough around the edges, and then it has the dual purpose of being able to run to the lumber yard and pick up some supplies.
That's awesome. And you just bought a truck too.
Yeah, I got not a classic. I got a 2003 Tundra or something like that.
Well, so somebody who owns a 2002, I'd say that's pretty close to classic. But
yeah, but it works great. It's got a full size bed, so I can put sheet goods in there without having to cut them down or anything, or have them hanging out the tailgate. So that's
and then
great.
you immediately sent your mother-in-law out so it would break down, right? This is the best part of this.
That didn't break down on her. The Subaru that I offloaded.
Oh, that's right.
is what broke down. Yeah, that poor thing.
I just came back from, well, this is difficult to say. So I went to the headquarters of Hitachi Power Tools in Atlanta on Monday. And on Tuesday, it was no longer Hitachi Power Tools. It had become Metabo HPT. So here's the story there, because everyone's going to ask. a few years ago, Hitachi sold Hitachi Power Tools to an investment firm. And so since then, they've been licensing the name from their old parent company. And that gets expensive. So now they've taken the name of one of this investment firm's other brands, Metabo, and combined it with HPT. I think it's Hitachi Power Tools, but it could also stand for something else. And now they have a new name. And the thing that they keep saying, and it appeared to be the case, was that the tools have not changed, will not change. You can still get what was a Hitachi NR83 nailer and have some confidence it's going to be the same quality and last for years like the old ones did.
Yeah, I was taking a look at some of the stuff online and noticed that the battery packs are all still the same. So the old Hitachi impact driver I have uses the same parts.
It just has a different sticker on it, honestly. It's the same stuff.
Yeah, the color scheme's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing they were showing us, or what they were showing us when we were down there, was their new battery platform, which is a 36-volt combination battery platform. That is to say, you can put these new 36-volt packs in the old 18-volt tools. It knows the difference and will switch accordingly, much like DeWalt's FlexVolt system. And there's a bunch of new tools, and these higher voltages are better suited to high draw tools, rotary hammers, grinders, miter saws, table saws, this kind of stuff, things with a big motor that takes a lot of juice. And so this higher voltage gives them more power.
Cool.
And when you use them in the old tools, the 18-volt tools, you get longer run time. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
The thing they've done that I have not seen in many years was they've come out with an AC adapter so you can plug this stuff into when power is available.
Yeah, that's a great thing. That's because you don't always need to run battery up.
And
it costs
batteries
a lot
are
for those tools.
expensive. Yeah.
Well, and then you can have one tool that can do two different situations.
I thought that was super neat, and I got to try some of the stuff, and that was sure fun.
So how have you guys? I've only used some of the. I noticed that the handheld tools are getting more powerful and more compact. I have this little Hitachi impact driver that I love because it gets into tight spaces when you're working on cabinetry. And but I've seen, but I haven't tried any of those bigger power tools like the chop saws. How do they seem to work?
They work fantastic. That's all I can say is they just work great. For a long time, I was very resistant to the idea of a cordless table saw or a cordless miter saw because honestly, you set those things up and they don't go anywhere. But increasingly, new construction sites especially are so power starved that you kind of need to be able to power your own stuff. So that means either you're carrying around a generator or you need battery tools. So
yeah,
take your pick. I'd rather not listen to a generator myself, and I'd rather have the really rapid setup of not having to plug in stuff.
Yeah. It's nice. I've been testing out that Milwaukee.
What do you think?
I love it. I mean, it's great because I can just bring it in and out of the house whenever I feel like, and I don't have to grab an extension cord, and it's plenty powerful enough. I've been cutting tons of plywood with it.
And that has
great.
an 8.5-inch blade?
Yeah, that sounds right. I can't remember. It looks like a normal. It looks
if we
exactly
get that
like
wrong,
the DeWalt.
we'll correct it in the show notes, right?
Yeah, I mean, it looks exactly like not exactly like, but it's very, very similar to the plug-in DeWalt.
What I found notable about the Milwaukee version is it also has the rack and pinion fence, which I thought was a DeWalt patent, but maybe that's expired, or maybe they licensed it, or maybe it's not patented. So
yeah, I don't know.
I know people like that, and I do too.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, should we get to a question?
Sure.
Rob, you read it.
All right. So we're following up on the brief chat we had about the home inspection last week. Is that right?
Oh yeah. So what someone asked, like, is it worth doing? Right, was pretty much the upshot of the question.
Yeah, and we kind of, just to recap, we kind of said that there seem to be different levels of home inspections, and it also depends on the state and whether it's sort of motivated by a realtor trying to get a sale to go through. And we didn't really have all the facts, so we did our best.
So guess what? We heard from a home inspector.
Yeah, I mean, we heard from a couple of home inspectors in the comments, and then an email, and I guess we didn't do too bad because they didn't seem upset.
They didn't roast us, right?
They were just trying to add to the conversation.
I got to say, when I saw it was from a home inspector, I was like, oh no, what do we do?
So I'll read this letter from John McKenzie Jr. from Home Run Home Inspection. He's a Connecticut licensed inspector, and he says, "Good evening, Fine Homebuilding podcast staff. As a licensed home inspector here in Connecticut, the quality and thoroughness, how invasive they will search and or research, has multiple levels of objective views. I'm not sure if you would be willing to dedicate an entire episode to home inspection, which may help consumers dispel some myths and misconceptions. However, one inspector's perspective will only present opinions in a particular state market. I will agree that the topic is a sensitive one, but might be worthy of some in-depth analysis." So he offers.
I agree.
Yeah. So he offers some inside baseball on the real estate agent referrals. Well, high volume producing agents will refer less competent inspectors, in his opinion, or maybe in his experience, quick in and out and cheap.
And that's because they want to close sales, right? Mm-hmm. That's just like a home inspection has the potential to sink a deal, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of the mandated home inspections is to protect the consumer, but obviously, it adds an additional cost and additional risk to the business.
Sure.
There are agents, few and far between, he says, who truly care about the home purchasing process and will refer inspectors who are extremely thorough. Some state licensing standard language is extremely vague, left up to interpretation, where others are very specific. Texas apparently has the most strict standards, he says. Unfortunately, due to the overly saturated market of real estate agents, 20,000 plus, compared to licensed home inspectors, 400 plus.
I'm assuming this is in Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm guessing, because that certainly doesn't seem like nationwide. The fine line we draw, at least the good inspectors, when it comes to quality is rare. Sincerely, John McKenzie Jr.
And so I couldn't let John write in and with this response without asking him some questions. And he was I think he was on vacation. He actually wrote some responses to my queries, which I thought was very classy. So thank you, John. And so I asked, if you were hiring a home inspector to evaluate a property for purchase, what would you ask them to assess their qualifications and motives? And he goes on to say, typically, my approach is to spend some time on the phone, sometimes upwards of 30 minutes, and go over the listing, usually posted online, and try to answer any big concerns the buyer may have with the property. In some situations, the listing photos may be able to show some red flags. Being able to communicate well with the home buyer before, during, and after the inspection is a big piece of the confidence puzzle, especially for buyers who don't have the knowledge of the different systems within a house. States that have licensing requirements will usually require continued education accreditation as part of their licensing process. My qualifications were through a national organization, the American Society of Home Inspectors. ASHI is how folks commonly refer to them. And then an internship of 100 inspections with a licensed inspector. Lastly, CT, Connecticut, licensing requires us to pass a 4-hour exam prior to applying for a state license. There are many inspectors who come from a building trade in some form. My background was in heating oil, diesel, and gasoline distribution, large pipeline storage tanks, and heavy plumbing and electrical. So this is the guy how I want to look at my house, totally. Because if you can make a oil tank safe or gasoline tank safe, the home should be no problem. And he has a family history of electricians, his father, uncle, and grandfather. I think that's really cool. A great inspector will always go beyond the minimum required standards, as would any good contractor or builder would go beyond code minimums. Good stuff, right?
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that the different states have different rules for this. That's so.
Yeah, I took a look online, and it seems only about half the states have required licensing for home inspectors.
So you can just hang out a shingle with potentially no qualifications whatsoever?
It seems that way, yeah.
That's terrifying. I asked how long a good home inspection should take. A good thorough inspection on a single-family home, approximately 2,500 square feet, should be at least 3 hours. Time on site is key, he says, not only for the inspector but also for the client. They can see what we see, and it offers good dialogue. Physical presence and good photos are important. Finally, I asked, how can you tell if your inspector is doing a good job of providing a thorough inspection and a report? A detailed, well-written report is just as important as an inspector's qualification, says John. For my clients, I always provide sample reports. I presume this is before they hire him, so they can review real-world examples of what my work looks like. So, John, thank you for writing in. And if anyone else has any questions about home inspections or want to share personal experiences, we'd love to hear it, because it is an important subject, and it is the only check that you're getting what you think you're buying, right?
Yep.
You're withholding I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, as if I'm a homeowner and I don't know anything about a house, and I see one of these inspection reports, I'm not going to know the difference between a good one and a bad one, probably. If I'm just the average homeowner and I don't have any kind of building
See, what do you think
or
they should do?
I don't know. I mean, I like the guy's advice, but I still don't know that it gets the average person to where they need to be.
So they have to listen to the Fine Homebuilding podcast, clearly.
Yeah.
To get them where they need to
right.
be.
Yeah.
I think maybe said this last time. It seems like maybe another topic we need to investigate further in the magazine or on the website.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm going to read this one because I love it. Hi guys, I'm a Catholic priest in the Port St. Joe and Mexico Beach area of Florida. So you guys know what happened in this area very recently. Mm-hmm. We just went through Hurricane Michael, if you didn't know, which caused serious damage to many homes and other structures. Some was due to storm surge and fallen trees, as was the case in Port St. Joe. Some buildings were damaged due to intense winds and storm surge, as was the case in Mexico Beach. One of my churches, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico Beach, had the roof completely cave in and had a wall fall down. And we have some pictures here. Interestingly, at least one building in the area survived, apparently unscathed. And if you all out there want to check this out further, there's a New York Times story. Among the ruins of Mexico Beach stands one house built for the big one, and it's fascinating reading if you're into this kind of stuff. I know you all are most familiar with building codes for the Northeast, but I would love to hear you all discuss what goes into making a building hurricane resistant and why they work. Love the podcast. God bless. Father Chris Winklejohn of St. Joseph Catholic Church and Our Lady of Guadalupe Mission, Port St. Joe, Florida. And this could be none more of a timely question. I know that's bad English, but right.
Certainly. I mean, he mentions that we might have different concerns up here, but really these hurricanes travel all the way up the coast. And
we had Sandy, right? And that decimated many homes in our area. Mm-hmm. And here's the house that's this church, right?
Yeah. Is that a Sebring? Crushed Sebring?
And this is the house that Father is talking about here.
Yeah.
And you know more about this house than I do.
I know a little bit about it. I don't know a ton about it, but I know. So this thing has basically concrete columns that go about 28 feet below grade.
What?
Yeah, they go way deep. They're 40 feet long total, so the house is elevated way above the ground. And there's just miles of rebar, they say, in this thing. It's got impact-resistant windows. I think the windows can take a 4-pound projectile at 140 miles an hour without shattering.
And the idea is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but on these elevated houses is that the lower part of the structure is meant to be sacrificial, right? So if you have a intense storm surge, that stuff gets washed away. Presumably the rest of the house where you live in stays above the water, right?
Well, yeah. So when you say the lower part of the structure, you mean any of the surfaces, the actual pilings are meant, maybe there's breakaway walls or something like that. But,
right, Matt?
Yeah, there was a breakaway wall, and I believe the stairs to the structure were also breakaway, so that when the storm surge hit those, it just ripped them right off, and it didn't compromise the rest of the structure.
And the idea is that if you allow the free movement of the water, that it's not going to push the house over.
Right.
And, I was doing a little bit of reading about, it's... What was it? Katrina was what, 1992? Was that
2005? I think.
No, what am I thinking of? What was 92? There was a big
Andrew.
Andrew. That's what it was. People were really starting to do some serious research. There were no codes, and there still in a lot of areas aren't as strict codes about this sort of thing. But people are waking up and being mandated to build at least to minimize the damage in these storms. But if
you feel like it can't be done, well, you just have to look at this house, and it's true. It proves that the concepts are sound.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So there's been a lot of research, particularly with government agencies and universities around the country and around the world on these topics, and there's plenty of research out there with proven, tested methods to build houses that can withstand these storms better. The tough question is, what's the balance of cost versus
potential risk?
Potential risk. So a house like this, the one in the New York Times article, the average person isn't going to invest that much money because they're going to think, well, I've got insurance on the house that'll cover some of it. So maybe you have to sort of look at your financial situation and your risk of where you are and strike a balance between how much damage it's going to do to the house and how much it's going to cost you out of pocket.
So you did some research, Matt, what this project cost as a premium versus the homes built all around it.
Right. So it was about twice as much per square foot to build this house.
So we're assuming this house is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars given where it is. So
yeah, I think it was for tax assessment purposes, it's like $400,000. But I would say they probably spent closer to $800,000 maybe building the house, and it's because it's assessed on square footage and all that.
So that's the difficulty for folks is when the house is finished, it needs to appraise for a certain value, and if you spend twice as much as what it's valued at, like, where's that money come from?
Right. Yeah. I think I read something. I think that a house that has all these hurricane protection measures built in it will sell for more, but it's not significantly more. It's not twice as much. It's like 7%.
Yeah, that's not enough.
So it's just not enough to make it worth it. I don't think.
But then you got to also consider the insurance costs because as these storms happen more and more, the insurance companies.
I would love to know though if this house had lower insurance rates than the ones around it. I have difficulty believing that it's much different.
It should now, I would
think it would too.
It's already been proved.
So what is different about this house, Matt, than the ones that blew away all around it?
It's, one, as far as I understand, it has concrete walls, tons of rebar.
So it's all concrete?
As far as I know, it's the walls are all concrete, yeah. And then the roof is, anchored to that, basically all the way down to the foundation. There's a continuous load path, just like you would have, a continuous load path going to the ground, to hold the roof up. You have a continuous load path to basically hold the roof down.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then they had also kind of minimized the extensions of the porch. They were going to have a balcony. They took that off. There were various things that they left off basically to make it. Also the overhangs. He wanted deeper overhangs on the roof, but the builder was like, "You want a hurricane-proof house? You got to have shallower overhangs."
Well, that kind of takes me back to some of the research that I was doing, and a lot of it comes down to materials and connections. I mean, you want a continuous connection from the foundation all the way up to the roof, and there's hardware or methods to make that happen. Obviously, in this case, they're also choosing materials that can withstand certain levels of forces. But shape plays a big part into this. The hip roofs as opposed to gable roofs because the wind can flow over it better. And what you were saying, Patrick, earlier about the space underneath, in a lot of these designs, that's also for wind, not just for water, so that the wind will actually flow around the house and not create these pressure differentials that end up blowing the roofs off of the houses.
So that's something we should tell folks. One of the greatest impacts on whether a house will survive a high wind event, whether it's a hurricane or a tornado, what have you, is the windows and doors need to remain intact. And if there's a failure, if there's a breach in the building envelope, it gets pressurized and they literally blow apart.
Yeah,
they
that's
blow
when
up.
the roof comes off, like immediately. The door blows in, the roof is gone like a second later.
So key to the survivability of these kind of storms is having windows and doors that are super sturdy.
Or shutters.
Or this structure seems to have both. Yeah. What else is key to having your structure survive one of these events?
I'm sure there's a lot more. Yeah, luck. But I mean, in addition to the shape, I mean, I read some stuff about like the shape of those pilings. These are just square.
Yeah.
But if they're round or triangular, and the point of that triangle is facing toward the surf, then that can also help direct water away. But I mean, in this case, the windows, I think 2 of them broke on the outside, but the inside panes remained intact. So they were able to take, these basically huge projectiles that are flying through the air, driven by 155-mile-an-hour winds, and the fact that those windows stayed intact is really what kind of kept that house together, I think, at the end of the day.
And I wasn't joking when I said luck, because all of this doesn't matter if the house is hit by a barge or something else that's going to breach it. And that happens, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing you have to think about when you're driving on the road. I'm a safe driver, I think, but it's the things that are going to hit you that are the problem.
Yeah.
And then that's the same in this. What is it, a 2x4 going, I forget how fast.
70 miles an hour, right?
Can go. I was watching on that Fortified website. We'll mention that in a bit. But there were some videos of testing in some lab of
this is
wind.
Totally worth watching. I showed it to Matt this morning.
We definitely have to put a link to that on the website. But it's this giant, what looks like an airplane hangar that I can't even imagine how big the fan is. They don't show it in the videos. And they're going from 45 up to 140 miles per hour winds against some mocked up houses, and showing the difference of structures and how they behave.
So this Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety tests building assemblies for perhaps the very selfish reason that insurance companies are trying to minimize their losses, but it has the added benefit of saving lives and property. So they build houses in this big warehouse, and then they try and blow them down.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's
dramatic.
It's sad. It would be sad if you were watching a picture of someone's actual house, but it's fascinating and really
scary,
and unbelievable what you see actually happening. Like you see in one of them, the roof peels back right off the bat, and instantly it looks like someone's shooting something out of a cotton candy machine. All the fiberglass just vaporizes and starts flying through the air.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
And some of the failures, you see the front door blow in, and then the house just explodes, right? Because it gets pressurized with that wind, and
yeah. So they have that institute that you talk about, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They've got something they call the Fortified Home Program, and it has sort of 3 different levels. They've got like a bronze, silver, gold standard for building, really for a bunch of different things. They've got, for high wind zones, and they've got one for hurricanes
are they region
as well.
specific, Matt, or are the recommendations the same for all houses throughout the country?
It really depends on
where
your
you're
wind
at,
zone.
what the
you're
risk
at.
is.
Yeah, so if you're in a high wind zone area, you'll do certain things, basically most of that's geared toward your roof. And in hurricane zones, the different levels, they handle different things. The bronze standard is really for your Category 1 storm areas, and it goes up to the gold standard is really only for Category 3 storms, and this was a Category 4 storm. So,
almost 5.
Almost 5, exactly. So whether or not these things, these measures in fortified home would have saved one of those houses is, maybe a little bit questionable, but it's a lot less expensive. I think if you go with their gold standard, it'll add probably about $30,000 to.
That's what they say.
That's what they say, to the cost of a house.
And one thing they point out, and a lot of other government agencies and people testing this stuff point out, is that the goal is not always to save the entire house, but to minimize the damage, to minimize the cost of the damage. So some of these programs have recommendations that are really primarily focused on retaining the roof and minimizing water intrusion.
And it's easy stuff, right?
Yeah.
Comparatively.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things, really, even for the Category 1 hurricanes, a lot of it is like bolstering, like doing things to strengthen gable end walls. So, to me right there, that says don't have gable end walls.
Yeah,
build a hip roof.
Yeah.
If you live in a high wind zone, build a hip roof. It'll last.
After Andrew, I got a job at Pittsburgh Habitat for Humanity, and because of the monumental destruction of Miami area, Homestead, Florida, after Andrew, the Habitat down there had this giant infusion of cash, right, to rebuild structures, and nearly all of so I went down there as part of a group from Pittsburgh to learn how to gear up for a much bigger building, like as far as scale, like going from a dozen homes a year to hundreds, And so we went down there to learn that stuff and then help out on the building. And nearly all of these very modest homes had hip roofs for that very reason. And tons of metal connectors to do what you describe, which is to keep the load path consistent, so in the high winds that the house stays stuck to the foundation.
Yeah, because instead of being a compression path, I mean, that's a tension path.
Yeah.
So you need connectors that can
And
withstand
steel.
tons of of uplift.
Well, one thing we pointed out earlier in those talking about those videos of those houses being tested is a lot of those houses, especially down in Florida and the Gulf Coast region, have these very flimsy porch roofs attached to them because they don't have to worry about snow loads, and as long as they don't have a major wind event, they're
fine.
The rain's not going to hurt it. But depending on how those things are braced and how they are attached to the house can have a big effect on how the house itself survives, because there was one that they had firmly attached it to the house, to the sheathing, and not firmly attached the posts to the ground, and it literally acted like a can opener, and it acted like a kite and lifted the roof sheathing right off of the house.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a takeaway, is make sure that everything is very well connected to the ground, no matter where you build, right?
Yep.
Now, I want to talk about, the pastor, the father was asking for help. How do I figure out what to do on my own place? And we've offered a lot of insight into what the problems are, but one thing I want to point out is that FEMA, if you go to FEMA.gov, there are a lot of resources that talk about not only how to do this stuff, but how to get the funding to do this stuff. And there are even grant programs in a lot of areas that are either federal or state grants. Maybe there's some local ones too, particularly in Florida and other Gulf region states. And also go to your local large universities, because they're the ones who are doing a lot of the research on this. And their goal is to help people out. So
I'd say the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety too. I would totally look at their recommendations.
Yeah,
this is going to be a problem going forward. And it used to be, and my one of my former bosses pointed this out to me, that until pretty recently, if you built a structure on the coast, whether it be the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic Coast or the Pacific Coast, those structures were very simple. They were beach shacks, and they blew away. And then next year, folks would come back with their friends in a pickup truck and rebuild them. But now the most expensive real estate in the country is on the coasts.
Yep.
And so we all, as a society, pay for the cost to rebuild these places when they're destroyed. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't live on the coast, but we got to do a better job of making the structures survive these storms, because the costs are astronomical to rebuild after these events.
Yeah, you figure a lot of these are on barrier islands, which are basically sandbars, and they move with the storms, and they're constantly working to try to bolster the barrier islands. I remember there was a town on the south shore of Long Island, I think out in the Hamptons, that they'd been bailed out so many times, their roads washed out, the bridges washed out, houses knocked down, that they were told, you're not going to get any more help from I forget what it was, the town or the county or the state, and they basically seceded from their town or in order to be responsible for their own cleanup. But this was a wealthy community where these people, a house got knocked down and they move right in and build it back up because it was worth it to them to live in that location.
I also went down to the Gulf Coast after Katrina a year later to survey the reconstruction effort for the magazine I was working at the time, and this kind of storm really changes the fabric of a community. In Biloxi, there was a lot of very middle and working class homes close to the Gulf, and when the reconstruction started, they all became concrete high rises because folks just couldn't afford to build there anymore. So it's a big question, and I don't know that we'll get to the bottom of it today, but thanks to the father for writing to us and asking. You got anything to say?
No, just good luck.
Yeah. We're thinking about you, Father, and the rest of you down there, and hopefully we'll get some guidance on how to build to survive these storms, which seem like they're increasingly common.
Yeah.
Now let's take some time for a little bit of housekeeping. This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you in part by Titebond. Bonding heavy materials to vertical surfaces is a real challenge. To meet that challenge, you need a durable adhesive with grabbing power you can trust. Titebond's Ultimate Tight Grab Adhesive has twice the vertical strength of most other adhesives and is uniquely designed for bonding a wide variety of building materials, including stone, brick, and concrete. Tight Grab is ideal for indoor and outdoor applications and is 100% waterproof. Available at building supply stores, lumber yards, and home improvement stores. Visit Titebond.com for more details.
So, what's next, Rob?
Next on the list, warming up a cold floor. So this particular person who wrote in is asking about a space above a garage. That's correct, right, Patrick?
Yeah. Do you want me to read it or do you want to read it?
Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Hey, guys. Love the show. Question for you. The house I'm working on, he's doing the carpentry and painting, has a den above a currently unfinished 2-car garage. It had a leak from the porch, and they took the ceiling down. The contractor doing the work on that part of the house started putting in R13 insulation with the craft facing face down, which I guess is toward the garage space, right? Until I had the homeowner pull the plug on it. The garage is unheated, and it has cinder block walls. The ceiling, which is also the den floor, is 2x8 wood framed with old plank subfloor, and likely cement board, then tile. My question, what can be done to heat the floor? Low voltage radiant, pipe system? We can't touch the tiles on top. We can only work below. Ideally, we'd like to stuff as much insulation as the joist cavities as possible, maybe R38 bats. Foam the ends of each joist bay, and then a layer of taped 2-inch rigid insulation over the bottom of the joist. Then drywall. Am I nuts? Overdoing it? How do you suggest we keep this super cold room habitable in its Brooklyn, New York location? Thank you. Would send a video, but way too awkward. I don't know what that means. I don't know what kind of video he wants to send.
Well, there's two concerns here. It's not just the heat; it's the fact that it's over a garage,
and the garage is cold.
Yeah, but I mean, you got to also think about if they're parking cars in there, they've got to worry about
CO
gases getting, the exhaust gases getting up into the house. So,
so the idea is we need to keep that air separate, no matter what.
And this goes back to a conversation we have a lot about air sealing and envelope details. And the way you would deal with something like this is probably very similar to what we were talking about that wall with the vinyl siding in one of our previous episodes, where you've got your insulation cavity, rigid foam, and then some sort of cladding on that. In this case, it would be just the
drywall ceiling. Mm-hmm.
And the rigid foam that he kind of alludes to seems like it would make a lot of sense. It would be a layer that you could tape and seal to add to your air sealing layer, and it would, in that limited amount of space, provide you. Maybe it's not so bad to put the bat above it like he was suggesting, but I did look this up and found something on Green Building Advisor, a very similar question somebody was talking about. And I'm going
to interrupt you. Green Building Advisor is our companion high-performance building website. So.
Yep. And the recommendation was on par with that, with they were saying probably 2-inch rigid foam. And several people suggested dense packed cellulose to get the most bang for their buck in the limited space that they had there.
And dense packed cellulose does a great job of resisting airflow, so that would also help to maintain that separation between the unconditioned garage and the living space above.
If you put in some kind of heating, though, underneath that floor, can that be in contact with that? Do you know? Or do you want an airspace between?
So the temperature of a hot water system is pretty low. Mm-hmm. You're talking under 140 degrees, I would estimate. Yeah. So I don't think that would be a concern.
What if you're doing the electric that he's talking about?
So I don't think you can do that from below. It just doesn't have the horsepower to get through all that assembly, right? That's meant to be as part of a thin set layer when you set the tile, right?
I have seen, when I was looking through stuff, there was one that I saw that you could use in a retrofit. I don't know if it would be able to get through all those layers or
Yeah, I
not,
think that's the issue.
but, and maybe it's an option.
And since you do have all those layers to get the heat to go up through, the more insulation you can put below, the better.
The better.
Because
I would say make that ceiling as tight as possible and skip the in-floor heating. If you improve the air sealing and insulation level in the floor, it's going to be way more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean if you've got enough insulation underneath that floor, hopefully there's some other heating source in the room or could be provided up above the floor somewhere.
Yeah, and if you've ever walked barefoot on in-floor radiant heating, it doesn't feel warm. Like it's like
unless your house is freezing cold.
Yeah. That's really the only time where it's going to really maybe feel warm. And in that case, then it's not really doing its job if the house is that cold. But yeah, I mean, if the idea is that you're going to be walking around on a hot floor, that's not going to do it. I mean, just maybe insulate it as well as possible, and then heat the space with some sort of
a mini split.
Yeah, mini split, or that's the thing. He doesn't talk about what kind of systems they have. If they have a boiler, then maybe he could just run in floor or underfloor radiant. You can retrofit PEX under there.
Totally, and that would make more sense.
Yeah, and you can screw basically aluminum brackets underneath that, and then just hang the PEX in that, and the PEX will transfer its heat to the aluminum, and then the aluminum to the subfloor and up. So,
but then again, if he's got the floor opened up and he's got access to plumbing because he's thinking about putting hydronic heating in there to begin with, it might just be as easy for him to go ahead and run some hydronic baseboard upstairs because I think in a lot of these types of situations people are assuming that because of the existing condition seems so dire, the cold floor and the cold room below, they don't realize that by doing the air sealing and insulation details will then cause you to
don't
require,
need as much heat.
You won't need as much heat as you think you need.
Right.
Once you do those.
And you're going to drill 2 holes for that instead of the, 100 holes you may have to
right,
drill
to
for
snake the tubing around.
Yeah, and I mean that's always the best strategy is to focus more effort and money on your envelope details because in the long run that's going to save you more money over the life of the.
You guys see, I have my code book out here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I brought the code book today. So I want to say Jackie did a great thing telling the lame contractor who was trying to put the R13 in the floor. That doesn't even meet the code requirements. And
craft side down.
I don't know what this guy was thinking. It's a shame. Don't get me started. Anyway, so Brooklyn is in Zone 4. And according to the 2012 IRC, I think that's what New York is on, you need R19 in the floor. So even that was just totally wrong.
Well, they're probably adding air films, and there was going to be drywall, and the R value of the
total assembly,
and the thin set. Yep.
So for those of you following along in your code books at home, the table N1102.1.1.
If you haven't yawned up to this point, this is where you start.
You can find the insulation requirements for walls, floors, roofs, everywhere, window glazing, and get those answers for your respective climate zone. It's my favorite table in the whole code book. Whole code book.
Just a quick note back to that craft side down thing. I'm sure that most people who aren't really well versed in energy efficient remodeling just assume that paper is just there to staple it to the edge of the framing members. I bet you most people who install fiberglass insulation don't even know what that paper is for other than stapling it up.
For those of you out there, you always want it to go to the warm side. And in a cooling climate, that means toward the conditioned space. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. In a heating climate, it goes toward the inside. In a cooling climate, it goes to the outside, right? You've put it on the exterior.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So it goes to the warm side.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you're going to consider fiberglass at all that you need to have the air sealing details right for it to even really be worth
Yeah,
it.
it's a complete waste of time if you don't get the cavities sealed up, because air just blows right through it. And anyone who's ever done remodeling work with old fiberglass will tell you what it looks like. It's a filter.
Yeah, it just basically turns black.
It just catches all the dirt that's moving in the air that's moving through the insulation. I've always wondered, does its performance improve with a greater collection of dirt? Does it stop the air movement better when it's full of mouse poop and dirt?
How many years does that take? Well, it depends on how many mice you have in the wall.
I've never taken out fiberglass insulation in an old house that wasn't anything but completely disgusting. And it's not a knock on the product. It can work fine. It just nobody understood and did the work to make it work correctly, and that means sealing the space where it's in on all six sides completely.
Yeah, and there are some people who will tell you in the building science and energy efficiency community that you shouldn't even consider using fiberglass, but if it's done well, it can be all right.
Building Science Corporation has done research with test walls and concluded that properly installed any insulation does its job.
Properly installed. That's
Properly installed.
That's
That
the
is
key.
the takeaway.
Yeah,
Yep.
in my attic, I've got a mix of all kinds of insulations. I did the rigid foam between the framing members. I did fiberglass bats in some places where it was going to be difficult for me to blow in insulation later on, and I did cellulose. And my attic used to be full of mice, and I haven't seen a bit of evidence since I did that, regardless of which insulation part wall has the insulation types. And I'm pretty confident that a lot of that had to do with the air sealing details I did on every single cavity that insulation was put into.
So the mice are riding it on the air currents too?
I think that they're just not finding any way to get into there. Is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how they get into my attic, but I'm going to start locking the cats up there for a week at a time.
It's this time of year. I hear them coming and trying to get in my basement now. It's just really, really a drag because you're sleeping and you hear scratch, 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 scratch. Chew, 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 chew.
Yeah.
They're very industrious little creatures.
Those Victor mouse traps work fantastic.
That's always been my favorite too.
Yeah.
You're talking about the old
Snap
style.
trap.
Old
Yeah.
style. Yeah.
When I had mice in my attic before I did all the insulation retrofit, I bought one of these little black boxes. It's got two little metal. It looks like a tiny defibrillator that you take out if someone was having a cardiac event, and it's like got this little maze that they go through. You put a peanut in the end, and that's enough to get them to go in there. And it's a pretty tidy way to get rid of the mice.
So does it shock them?
Yeah, it basically sends.
So you have to plug it in?
It's got 2 AA batteries in it, I think, and then you just turn it upside down and empty that. I mean, I'm not a big fan of killing stuff, but if you got to get them out of your attic, it's been the most reliable and clean way to do it.
So, my son, we moved to Newtown, Connecticut, so I could take this job at Taunton, and he was 3 years old, and we moved into this rental property, and it had some mice, like I think all houses do, right? I don't think it has anything to do with the construction or what. It's just like mice are trying to get indoors because it's nicer than living outside in the winter.
Yeah, and there's food there.
But my son loved mice, and so we had to catch and release these freaking mice we'd find and sneak them down the street to let them go. It's like,
I've used those traps. I've got those too. The steel cat from Victor. That also works.
do you let them go then?
Yeah, then I let them go.
Do you drop
Just
them
into the
off
woods.
at the rest stop on the way to work?
No, I've just been dropping them off in the woods, and they probably come right back in.
That's what I was
But
thinking.
they've got to get through the gauntlet of the cats.
Yeah.
So, they catch a lot. They're murder machines.
I used the Victor Snap. That's what it is, Victor, right? Victor
Yeah, I
Snap
think so.
traps for
Victor,
years,
Victor.
and then one time I had to buy Tomcat brand because the retailer didn't have that brand, and I actually like those better now.
Really?
Yeah.
I had a bunch of those because that's all they had at, I can't remember
Target.
what store it was. Yeah, but
That's
I bought
what
a bunch of those, and at first I didn't like it. Some of them worked, some of them, I don't know. I've had mixed results with both, I
Me
think.
too.
But
I think the quality is like how much effort it takes to trip the trap varies by individual trap.
So I haven't seen one of these in person, but someone described to me one time something that was maybe a mouse hotel. It was like those roach hotels, but it was a live catch trap, and what it basically was a big box
with a door
that had a trap door in it.
Yes.
And it sounds like, some haunted house.
Yeah.
You've got this trap door and the mice just fall into the dungeon and they stay there till hopefully you remove them before they die. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't look forward to my mouse season. You know what, gents? I think that's all the time we got today.
Well,
Really?
that's it from the Mouse Catcher podcast.
All right, let me read the outro here. I already did this part. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Rob and Matt for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please comment, positively, hopefully, on iTunes and YouTube, right?
Sure, YouTube's, iTunes, on our website. But basically, if you comment or leave a review on iTunes, it just helps people find our podcast.
And you can put your questions there, too, if you want. We all read them. Most are very complimentary. Thank you all. Happy building.